Hey everybody, it's February 25th. We're just approaching the end of Black History Month. And while this is an older book, I definitely have had this on my TBR for a long time, and I just finished it, so I'd love to talk to you about it. Hey guys, so this book has been on my TBR for a long time. We're talking about The New Jim Crow. It's written by Michelle Alexander, who is a really impressive academic and advocate. And, well, I'll tell you about her credentials in a moment. It's subtitled Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness. It's not a big book. It's, after endnotes, 296 pages. Published in 2010. I think this was an edited version from 2012. So, at minimum, we're still talking about 12 years ago, over 12 years ago. It's a little outdated for sure. But I think that this is especially valuable because in so many ways, things have generally gotten worse for African Americans since, just after Obama was elected. Do we have reason to be optimistic? That's sort of her approach in the Obama era. And she says, no, we don't really have much reason to be optimistic. Yes, in certain directions. Sure, there isn't like the overt segregationist mindset. At least it can't be expressed explicitly anymore, but it's still very strong. And when you take a statistical view of how blacks are treated in the United States, you can't come to any other conclusion that there is a caste system going on here and that blacks are being targeted in so many ways, economically and in law enforcement. And I could go on for days and keeping them out of the political arena. This was a New York Times bestseller. And as I'm sort of bouncing around here, but I want to take a moment and talk about this lady's credentials here. Michelle Alexander, she's a brilliant civil rights lawyer, an advocate and legal scholar, engages in public speaking and freelance writing, but she has been really heavily involved throughout the academic field and also in the legal field. And she was even, this was really probably most impressive to me, she was the clerk, a law clerk for Justice Harry A. Blackmun on the U.S. Supreme Court. So, I mean, that's getting to be, I think, when did he age out? I think he retired in the late 90s, like 1997. So if she was a clerk for him, she's been around a little while. I think she's in her 50s now. Really impressive lady. She also says here, prior to joining academia, Alexander engaged in civil rights litigation in both the private and nonprofit sector, ultimately serving as the director of the Racial Justice Project for the ACLU of Northern California. So she's had her hands in a lot of stuff, and you can tell she's extremely informed and meticulous in her scholarship. I also enjoyed seeing a foreword here by Cornel West, who I'm a fan of. He's a little crazy, but I do like him a lot, and certainly when it comes to the black struggle, he's right up there with the best. So anyway, what I really liked about this book specifically, and I maybe you can help me out. Can you please recommend a contemporary version of this, like something that's maybe been written within the last 3 years, with that level of detail? I really, really want to track down basically this book, but since 2020, I would say, because it is especially another angle that is important and needs to be brought up is how blacks were disproportionately affected during COVID, and that's an important part of the picture. But in speaking about incarceration and the post George Floyd moment, I want to see how these numbers stack up. Her statistics are amazing. Like, there's a lot of statistics that I can kind of remember. They come to me in fits and starts when I'm in the middle of a conversation, but when I'm doing an overview, these things, they don't tend to come to mind, But something that like one end of the legal field that I hadn't thought of too much was she shows the disparities, for example, in appeals. What kind of appeals have success or are even listened to and heard compared to whites who appeal their cases? That's certainly not even remotely a priority when you're talking about the disparities between black and whites. But she even has details like that in there, and it shows you just how there is no real legal provision for somebody who was born at the lowest caste and born into just the worst poverty. Doesn't have access to healthcare, doesn't have access to clean drinking water, as is the case for many African American communities. Lots of the stunning indigent realities for descendants of the Great Migration, which happened between the 20s and the 70s, where blacks were consolidated into inner cities and ghettos and things like that, and how that in itself, based on Jim Crow type laws, initially certainly, loan discrimination and housing discrimination, and how that produced these realities, and now people being born into as descendants of that tradition, how they have no other choice but to fend for themselves, or they're so routinely targeted, especially ghettos, constantly getting raided. It's just like you can go into these communities just about throughout any week, and you're going to have some shakedown by the police, and people just spread their legs and their arms out, and they know the procedure because this is just life for them. So African Americans are so disproportionately targeted, and then once they get a criminal record for something very, very small, she shows how, like, minor drug possession charges, for which whites are far more active in, and she provides statistics for that, how whites are disproportionately more likely to engage in minor drug possession and violent crime, and she shows all these different things. But it's the black person who gets targeted most times, and then they have to, life is so much worse for them once they get out. Simple parole violations can set somebody up for a lifetime of imprisonment, or with lots of the legislation that Clinton brought online, for example, with mandatory minimum sentencing. And even some things, I was surprised to see this too towards the end of her book, even certain, reforms that Obama had brought in place, because Obama didn't want to be seen as soft on crime, kind of like Clinton, he even implemented reforms that made it exponentially harder for black people and made them worse targets. These are a couple of things that he did. I'm not comparing him to Clinton, and I'm not even saying that Obama was on the whole bad for African Americans. I'm not saying quite that, but I'm just pointing to the reality that African Americans are disproportionately targeted, penalized, and then they spend the rest of their life losing their voting rights, even with minor, drug possession charges and things like that. Or if you're an upstanding African American, for example, and you choose to opt out of voting one year because neither side really impresses you, you'll be removed from the voter rolls. Just at every opportunity, blacks are losing their rights. And this is 2010, 2012. So things have gotten decidedly worse. I would say in terms of the brass, at least what I've heard, the actual numbers, brass tacks, how many blacks are being incarcerated now relative to their population in the United States, that has improved a little bit by a few percentage points. But in virtually every other trend that she brings up, it's gotten worse and worse and worse. So anyway, if you guys have read this, I would really love to hear from you, and I would especially love to hear from you if you're aware of a book that basically takes the same approach as this, but is much more current, because this was such a good read for me. I hadn't I had read works like Supreme Inequality by, I think his name was Adam Cohen. Uh, I had read Nine Black Robes by Joan Biskupic. I've read, Democracy in Chains. There's a lot of books, and, even Carol Anderson's works, like One Person, No Vote, and White Rage. All of these books have painted a picture for me of how things have progressively gotten worse. I was aware of a lot of the stuff that she brings up. If I could find a book that sort of codifies all that information, especially when it comes to the statistical analysis, this book is probably the best for that. I rated this 4 stars, by the way. The only reason she got struck 1 star, the fact that this is a little bit outdated. I mean, I'm not. That's no reflection on her writing or her scholarship. But that does have to be brought on board. For people right now, this is not so current. But another reason why I sort of brought her rating down a little bit towards the end, and I mean the very end of the book, she does offer some insights into how we actually improve things for African Americans, and she takes a look at like affirmative action, for example, where she is generally quite critical of it. You're left with this sense that, like, well, I'm not very clear on what you're pitching we should do here. She doesn't really give us a roadmap forward. All she sort of seems to say towards the end of the book is that we need to start being more vocal about these things and having honest conversations with white people. And it's like, yeah, but like, that's not really the issue. I mean, the issue is structural, and you're not going to just tell them. It takes a little more than that. So I found her very vague, very specific in her criticism towards affirmative action, for example, but vague on the solution side of things. In fact, if I could just share one thing with you, this is kind of the most explicit that she gets in terms of what the solution is. And she quotes James Baldwin, I believe. She quotes James Baldwin as, and this is a couple paragraphs, but you'll definitely enjoy this. This is about the most explicit that she gets in terms of how we really address these problems in the United States. This is the crime of which I accuse my country and my countrymen, and for which neither I, nor time, nor history will ever forgive them, that they have destroyed and are destroying hundreds of thousands of lives and do not know it and do not want to know it. It is their innocence which constitutes the crime. This innocent country set you down in a ghetto in which, in fact, it intended that you should perish. The limits of your ambition were, thus, expected to be set forever. You were born into a society which spelled out with brutal clarity, and in as many ways as possible, that you were a worthless human being. You were not expected to aspire to excellence. You were expected to make peace with mediocrity. You have, and many of us have, defeated this intention, and by a terrible law, a terrible paradox, those innocents who believed that your imprisonment made them safe are losing their grasp on reality. But these men are your brothers, your lost younger brothers, and if the word integration means anything, that is what it means, that we with love shall force our brothers to see themselves as they are, to cease fleeing from reality and begin to change it. For this is your home, my friend. Do not be driven from it. Great men have done great things here and will again, and we can make America what it must become. It will be hard, but you come from sturdy peasant stock, men who picked cotton and dammed rivers and built railroads, and in the teeth of the most terrifying odds achieved an unassailable and monumental dignity. He's speaking to his nephew, I think, a young man here. You come from a long line of great poets since Homer. One of them said, "The very time I thought I was lost, my dungeon shook and my chains fell off." We cannot be free until they are free. God bless you and Godspeed. So that seems to be her most explicit solution that she puts forward, which of course there are things to agree with there. But I mean, I think we should live in a world where there's concrete reforms that need to take place. And affirmative action has been good overall. It's certainly not caused harm. And those very few instances where it has, whites have been able to seek redress. for that. Most of what we're seeing in terms of affirmative action is actually coming through voluntary quotas that corporations are imposing because they see that it's good for business. We even see this in the UN. What's his name? Ban Ki-moon speaks about how he effectively used affirmative action to broaden the talent pool of women and other minorities. And he said, soon enough, we had a very diverse, inclusive group of people to work with. When people say, oh, that's affirmative action and, the state has no business doing that sort of thing, the few instances where the state does employ it, there is a whole lot of appeal process for whites if there ever was discrimination that they actually suffered damages from. The rest of this stuff that's getting called affirmative action is internal policies that corporations are putting forward because it's good for business. So I disagree with her that affirmative action is worth opposing. She also is very critical about, she's not critical about blacks getting involved politically, but she's critical about how, that hasn't actually produced better outcomes. In fact, in some ways, because of situations like Obama, where she said, he feels this pressure to, not seem soft on crime or to not seem like he's driven by racial ideology. He'll be working against the people that put him in office. And I still say, yeah, but it is better to still have more black people involved in those halls of power. Yes, it shouldn't change our psychology about these things. It shouldn't cause us to say, oh, we're living in a post-racial society and now allow ourselves to become complacent. No, but I disagree with her on those couple of points. It's not a strong disagreement. This is kind of like Freud's narcissism of small differences, right? But I had to sort of dock her a point on that she wasn't as clear and as forward about what to do. It seems kind of nebulous, like it's kind of like those people who are like, well, what's the solution? Well, I think we should just love each other more. That's it's not quite that bad, but that's kind of the impression I got from her at the end of the book. And I thought, she could have done better, especially somebody as brilliant as her, somebody as scholarly and impressive as she was throughout this book. I think she could have done a little better in those last, whatever it was, 10 or 20 pages. So I think I've spoken enough about this book. I would recommend this in the absence of knowing something that would really replace it or update it. So if you're interested in this sort of thing, going into it, it's a little bit dated, but man, what a great book. The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. And let me know what you thought of it in the comments below. I'd love to chat with you about it. And we'll see you in the next one. Thanks for stopping by. Hey everyone, I hope you liked this video. If you want more like the one you just watched, click the suggested video on this screen. Make sure you subscribe, and to connect with me on my other platforms, my handles are linked below in the description, alright? Take care, peeps. Till next time.